Welcome to the Malcolm Renfrew Interdisciplinary Colloquium for Tuesday, September 21st, 2021. I'd like to welcome our three presenters, including one who is rejoining the conversation after some time away from the University of Idaho. And before introducing today's panel, I wanted to just tell you about another program tonight and a program next week. So first, to let everyone know that tonight is Ambassador Ryan Crocker, former U.S. Ambassador to Iraq and twice U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan. And he'll be speaking at 6:30 in the Administration Building Auditorium. That is also available on Zoom, and it's a Zoom webinar that requires advanced registration. If you find the event in the University of Idaho calendar, or just Google Martin Forum at the University of Idaho, that will bring that up. Next week, we have another environmental related topic. Casey Bartram, who is a past presenter to this colloquium, will join us. She earned her doctorate here at the University of Idaho and is now the executive director and a senior scientist at Terra Graphics International Foundation here in Moscow. Her topic is making green energy, clean energy, the minerals that will power the low carbon future. And that'll be, again, a week from today, September 28th at 12:30 p.m. Today, though, we are marking the 10th anniversary of REACCH, Regional Approaches to Climate Change in Pacific Northwest Agriculture. So this is the 20th anniversary of the Renfrew Colloquium, started up in 2001, and 10 years later, along comes REACCH. And here to talk to us about that, the legacy for the Pacific Northwest of this multi-year, multi-state program are Sanford Eigenbrode and Jodi Johnson-Maynard from our College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, little typo there, and John Abatzoglou, a former member of the faculty in the U of I's Department of Geography, who is now Associate Professor and Graduate Program Chair in the School of Engineering at the University of California. So welcome back, John. Welcome, Sanford and Jodi. And Sanford's going to start things off. I will stop my share so you can put your slides up. Looks good.
Looks good, sounds muted.
Thank you. How did that happen? Okay, now it's working, eh? Everyone hear me?
Great, thank you. So
we're going to review the legacy of this project. Now I can, yeah. And there's three of us on panel, but there were many in the project. We're going to do our best. Some of you are familiar with this project and some may not have heard of it before. So we'll review it and then give you some idea about how it has influenced and left a legacy in our university, in our region. I was the project director of this this project that started 10 years ago. It was USDA funded, very large project, $20 million budget that ran from 2011 to 2018. It was a collaboration between UI as the lead institution, Washington State University, Oregon State University, and ARS. And our goals were on the left here to identify and implement approaches for our region's farms to become more resilient to climate change while reducing their emissions of greenhouse gases that could exacerbate that. We also had a big component that was aimed at extending this information to key audiences, the public and farmers, and to educate from K through 20. We took a very aggressive interdisciplinary approach. It was regional with a footprint. I'm sorry, it's a little bit small, but on the top right of the slide, you can see the extent of the area that we focused on. It was balanced between research, education, and extension, but with 75% research. And its impacts have been several that have led to a better understanding of climate change in our region and its importance and influence on agriculture and what farmers might do. This slide is just to show the disciplinary diversity. From the top left, people working on aspects of soil biology and ecology, measurements of greenhouse gas fluxes and nitrous oxide emissions, different agronomic components, the extension components, and the education components are illustrated here. And we made a lot of findings and we published them. There was probably close to 300 publications out of the project overall. Here are some key findings as I interpret them anyway. The data sets. So a historical meteorological gridded surface downscaled from global models to allow us to make inferences at a reasonable and spatial scale for understanding impacts on agriculture. Downscale also to give seasonal forecasts that can be useful for farmers. Statistical downscaling methods that John Abatzoglou pioneered for doing this downscaling, and projections into mid-century for our region that included overall warming trend and drier summer months, with heterogeneity of how this plays out in different parts of the footprint of the REACCH project, with implications for agriculture. For cropping systems, we could apply those models to crop models and actually project some general increases in wheat yield, taking into account CO2 fertilization that for mid-century, and then declining yields due to increasing stresses in general terms. A new agricultural or agroecological classification system for the region that's illustrated in this map. It was based on satellite imagery and statistical and synthesizing that to see what producers are doing on the ground and understand how those behaviors change as climate changes across the region and from year to year, and identified needs and strategies to substitute for the widely used practice of fallowing, and greater diversification of farming systems to promote soil organic matter, conservation, soil health in general, and limit the loss of nitrogen into water in the atmosphere. There was a focus on nitrogen, carbon, greenhouse gases, and erosion, and we gathered a 20 site years of continuous data for CO2, H2O, and energy fluxes, and that should say N2O and energy fluxes. Net carbon intakes then were detected for winter wheat, so it's a slight sink, and spring wheat here was found to be slightly neutral. We also found some that no-tilling systems can mitigate nitrous oxide pulses that can occur at different times of the year. And that some pictures here show the work in progress, featuring our eddy flux towers that detected and measured in real time gas fluxes across these wheat fields. For pests, weeds, and diseases, we documented earthworm distributions across the region and came to understand those in terms of soil properties and soil moisture. We found a new aphid species. We made projections for key pests and weeds given climate change and anticipated climate change, and detected differences in some of our wheat pathogens in their responses to climatic variables. We provided resources for farmers via all the available outlets to us. So used field days, talks, webinars, blogs, and fact sheets. We created 11 multimedia case studies that included videos of the farmers who were early adopters of practices that help improve nitrogen and carbon management and ameliorate climate impacts. Much of this information was encapsulated in a book called Advances in Dryland Farming in the Inland Pacific Northwest. It's published a few years ago, and a tool for climate savvy enterprise budgeting by farmers to plan their farms under different climate contingencies and their overall farming budgets. That's called AgBiz Climate, that comes out of Oregon State University. The resources and tools for farmers also included these. REACCH contributed to the development of these tools. They are available and linked on our website so that you can use them for providing graphical summaries of climate, making seasonal forecasts, future climate projections for different points on the map, weather and winter wheat yield projections, and historical data, crop choice, cold hardiness zones, and so on. All of these things John can talk about because he was the main engine to producing these products. We also produced resources, tools for teachers in the form of modular curricula for Pacific Northwest primary and secondary teachers. This is a screenshot of the website where one can go and extract these curricula. They have been downloaded, or at least visited at least 1,000 times, and we know that there are teachers who have used them because teachers helped us develop them. And they are designed to conform to the requirements of the curricular requirements of all the states for which this is relevant. Coming back to our approach, we tried to take the broadest and most deliberate approach to an understanding of interdisciplinary nature of our work and the project. This included a social network analysis of our own organization. That's what that colorful figure is. Implementing the Climate Science Toolbox, which was derived from and developed in the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, a University of Idaho creation that is now led by Michael O'Rourke, who's moved to Michigan State University, and he helped us with this aspect of the integration. We also tried to reach into the fine arts and humanities for collaborative interaction. And shown here is a triptych that was created by the graduate students to represent the themes of the project. There's a picture of our band, which was interdisciplinary as well as instrumental. And Dan Buckfitch created a composition based on some of our work about interdisciplinary collaboration. And we had a regional art show that was invited across the region for those who had ideas for interpreting climate and agriculture. So a big challenge from the start to finish the project was communicating what we're doing and why to our stakeholders, the farmers and the public, At the outset, our project was viewed with skepticism because climate change and mitigation were politicized. Our key clients, the farmers, were among the most skeptical, and this was a big challenge. The project bent the conventions that they were used to, and for much of our land grant research was designed to address widely recognized challenges for citizens and farmers who usually immediately understand what we were doing. But in our case, it wasn't really clear because most farmers weren't ready for that and hadn't really asked for this work. So we worked hard to show how we responded to the science and how what we were doing was really beneficial for them, not only long-term, but near-term. We got feedback like, we love what you're doing, except for that climate change part. And but with time, this dissipated, and we got some strong allies for our work that are continuing to support ongoing work, as you'll hear about. The whole thing can be viewed online. Everything's up there. All our products, our research, our extension work, those curricula, and everything is here. There's the website, reachpna.org. I think our legacy is to have changed many lives, including those of us on the call. We trained 40 new scientists, and we had 80 undergraduate interns. We had expanded programs of many of our participating faculty, kind of brought climate and agriculture into the engineering realm, for example. We changed conditions in our environment and our region, provided tools and improved understanding of climate and agriculture. We have a basis for broader, deeper, ongoing regional collaborations around these themes. And 2 projects were enabled. One is a new USDA long-term agricultural agri-ecosystem research site, the R.J. Cook Farm, which is in Pullman, which was generated off of the foundation set by REACCH, and an ongoing USDA regional project called Landscapes in Transition. And that's what you're going to hear about next, because Jodi Johnson-Maynard, who was a key PI in REACCH, has gone on to lead us in this one, and considered a strong legacy of our project. We're proud of the fact that amongst our cohort of large climate change and agriculture projects, we're the only one for which there's a follow-on project, and LIT is that project. So we took on we also included a focus on the global dimensions of our problem, and had a conference, sponsored a conference that dealt with that. But I'll just go back here for now because of time and just say, here's the place to tune in on REACCH. And I'll turn it over to Jodi so you can learn about the Landscapes in Transition project. And we're going to do short presentations like this and then open and be ready for some discussion with everyone.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. All right, looks good. So I'm very happy to be here today, and it's great to be reminded of all the wonderful things that happened during the REACCH project and all the advancements that were made. I was actually an associate professor going into the REACCH project and was promoted before the end of it to full professor. And so we did generate a lot of data and a lot of good foundations that Sanford talked about that allowed the science to continue. But I would point out also that this project did have a really significant influence on many of our careers. Just the opportunity for the networking and the exposure and the funding that we received to train students had a significant impact on many careers. So, and Sanford pointed that out, but I'm an example of those impacts. So I'm going to go ahead and get started then. And this first slide really is background for LIT, which Sanford already went into. But I would say that this one publication in particular really resonated with our group when we were at the end of REACCH and thinking about where do we go from here? How do we move forward? And basically what this figure is showing is that if you look at land use change over time across the research area, if we don't, based on the trends that we see in the patterns, if we don't develop new methods of farming or new ideas, what we're likely to see is an increase in what we call fallow. So fallow is when we don't plant a field, and basically during that time when there's no crops growing, that land is really subjected to erosion. So there's a high potential for erosion because the ground is exposed to all the elements. And as a soil scientist, of course, that's something we don't want to see. We don't want to go back to the day where we had historically high and record-setting erosion events here on the Palouse. We want to keep our topsoil in place. So that was a major concern, not only with erosion, but also when you leave ground fallow, you have fewer organic matter inputs. So we have less organic matter being stored in the soil. So we started thinking about what do we need to do to prevent this and how can we move forward? And really it became very obvious during REACCH that our farmers really didn't have a large toolbox that they could pull from. They didn't have a lot of options when it came to preventing this expected increase in fallow. And the problem is quite complicated because it changes as you go across this climatic gradient of the study area. So where we're located in what's called the annual zone here, where we have enough moisture to produce a crop every year, we've been experiencing very wet springs, except for the spring. But in the past, we've had a lot of very wet springs where the soils are basically too wet for the farmers to get in and plant on time. And then in the drier regions, of course, we're more concerned about having what we call fall seed zone moisture. So enough moisture within the seeding zone of the soil to be able to have a fall seeded crop grow. So there are different concerns based on where you were located across the study area. And so we had to address that within the LIT framework. Okay, so what we came up with was the project that we refer to as LIT, or Landscapes in Transition. And essentially what we were looking at here is how can we fine tune or improve our wheat-based systems to be able to deal with the sort of climate variability that our farmers were grappling with. And so, of course, this project is led out of the University of Idaho. We are funded by USDA NIFA, which was originally the same program that REACCH was funded out of. And during the lifetime of REACCH, that panel or that program changed to what we call climate variability. And that was the funding program that funded LIT. So I can fit all the investigators on one slide, which is really nice. There were many of us. There are common names here of people that worked as part of the REACCH team. So we had that important collaboration to start out with. So we started with a really strong team to address these issues. The study area is very similar, although LIT is a much smaller project. It's only $3.5 million as opposed to $20 million. And so it's a much more focused effort. And our main research was in two of those agroclimatic zones that Sanford mentioned, the annual and what we call the transition, which is a drier zone where fallow is used more commonly as a tool to save soil moisture. So a little bit of background, we're funded by USDA. It is considered to be a coordinated agricultural project, which just means it has all components of research, education, and extension that are heavily related. It was funded through the Land Use Change and Climate Variability Program, includes 10 investigators, 3 postdocs, and 9 grad students. So again, much smaller scale. It is very much stakeholder driven. And that's another foundational piece that we sort of inherited from REACCH and we're able to grow. It is a systems-based assessment. So we have multiple scientists in different fields working on different aspects of sustainability when it comes down to it. And the focus on LIT was really about crop diversification. So what are new cropping systems that we can provide to our farmers that they can adopt to, again, deal with the climate variability that we're facing? So we have two systems of interest. The first is winter pea, and winter peas were desirable, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat, in the annual planting zone, largely because we are looking for more fall seeded crops. So we can plant them in the fall and don't have to worry about those wet soils. They're also of interest in the drier zones because they can actually be planted deeper than wheat. And the deeper you can plant a seed, the better likelihood that you have that you're going to reach moisture and be able to germinate that crop. They're legumes, so they fix nitrogen, so it's a fertilizer cost savings. And they have lower water use. Excuse me again. So we became very interested in how we might be able to replace a fallow phase in drier rotations with winter pea and still end up having enough moisture to grow the next crop. We're also interested in forage crops or similar idea to cover crops with grazing. And so this is a little bit more of a transformative alternative system where farmers would actually have to bring in cows to make this work. But the idea is that we grow this cover crop and skip the next crop in the rotation, allow the cover crop to grow to maturity, and then the farmers actually make their money instead of growing a second crop as part of the 3-year rotation on weight gain from the cattle. And so the objective here is to, again, provide this alternative crop, which reduces nitrogen fertilizer inputs because it can contain some nitrogen fixing plants in it. It provides competition for weeds and adds more organic matter into the system. So the experimental design includes small replicated plots in both St. John area and Genesee. So again, in the drier transition zone and in the annual crop production zone. Large replicated plots where we're studying these systems side by side with the business as usual rotation. And as Sanford mentioned, we're still using the EC towers to look at water and CO2 fluxes. So we have scientists in many different fields: entomology, weed science, soil science. We have economists. Everybody is sampling and taking measurements from these common plots. And so then the data will all be put together. So we have crop rotation and farm level profitability analyses that are ongoing. We'll be modeling, working on crop modeling, as well as support decision tools. And then looking across the supply chain about how these different rotations may impact both up and down the supply chain. So this is really skipping a lot. There's a lot of data that's been generated here that we don't have time to go into. But essentially, and this is actually a tool that from a website that John developed, and I don't know, maybe he'll mention it today, but you can go in and look at the look at precipitation data for a number of years. And so here I've just plotted the 3 years that LIT has been going, and the purple line 2019, let's see, the green line 2019, 2020, and then 2021. So you can see just within the 3 years of the LIT project, we've experienced a lot of variability in terms of the climate, in terms of the weather. And that has definitely influenced our research results, as it has influenced the yields and the productivity of farmers' fields in our area. But these are some of our major findings so far. Both the total amount and timing of precipitation have mattered. And so in 2 years where you might get near the same amount of precipitation, if you don't have the rain coming at a time, important growth stage, essentially, you can have a totally different result. And so that's something that has become more and more obvious and important in terms of management and the future of our farms. Impact of alternative crops on winter wheat yields, which is considered to be our biggest cash crop, if you will, and soil health tests really differed across sites and years. And I think that this is going to have some implications in terms of conservation programs and things like health, crop insurance, and those sort of aspects. And this really needs to be communicated to policymakers. We've determined that winter pea is a viable crop and can have some very important, significant influences both on below ground and above ground biological communities and nitrogen savings, especially in the drier zones around St. John. And the success of the cover crops or forage crops in this case is very difficult to predict. And it's something that we're still grappling with. And I think there'll be some future projects spun off of LIT that are really trying to address that particular question of still trying to make the agronomics of those cover crops work. And then finally, we know that our crops can sequester carbon. We're getting more measurements to say with a pretty good confidence that we can sequester carbon, which is important again in terms of managing CO2 emissions, except that fallow does not. And so I will end there and turn everything over to John. So as soon as I stop sharing my screen.
Okay, can folks see my screen here? Yeah, okay, great. So, oops, yeah. So, I am also somebody who I think benefited tremendously from REACCH, and similar to Jodi's story, I was sort of the new kid on the block. I think the proposal from REACCH was written maybe in my second year as an assistant professor at UI, and for some reason they involved me. And through the way, or I think most of my time at the University of Idaho, REACCH was ongoing, and I have to commend Sanford for his leadership. He did a great job. I've been on several large projects since, and I mean, I just go back to Sanford as being the model for sort of how you really sort of galvanize a bunch of people who are working on different topics to come together. So that I'll keep with me for a long time. I think also one thing maybe that's worth mentioning is that we certainly had to sort of have this crosswalk between the scientists and stakeholders, but there's also something to be said about the crosswalk in terms of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary or convergent science here, where we're working across different fields, trying to get to some common goals. And so I think I learned quite a bit from my colleagues, Sanford and Jodi and others, about sort of science that I really wasn't aware of. And so that I think that enriches my own work today. So I've obviously left Idaho, but a lot of the themes that I do today sort of continue from the work with REACCH. So I wanted to sort of highlight just a couple of these and show how REACCH, there's actually a really large reach of REACCH. It goes beyond the Northwest, and it goes to a variety of different cropping systems as well, and that's sort of what you see here. And so through REACCH, I was somebody who also worked with a number of students, and one of the students who worked with me, Lauren Parker, is continuing working in this field. She's actually the coordinator for the USDA California Climate Hub today, and so very much in this space where she's working on climate and agricultural issues and sort of that interface between the working lands and the new science that's coming in. We did a follow-up study. Lauren's work, part of her work was looking at the viability of specialty cropping systems, including almonds, which I now am in the land of almonds in Merced and the Central Valley. And we projected that almonds may become more viable in parts of the Northwest in a changing climate. And it turns out that I have a student now who, very much works in the agricultural sector, and he has working knowledge that almond trials are basically continuing now in Oregon as a means to alleviate the incredible water stress that California faces. Water stress that may go away temporarily, but realistically, living with less water is something that we're going to have to get used to, at least in parts of the Southwest. Another study here, just on the right-hand side, this was a study where Lauren looked at the suitability for peaches in the Southeast, which is culturally important, even though the Southeast doesn't produce the most peaches. They used to, though. And they've had a couple incredibly warm winters where they didn't get enough chill for the peach to actually set, and they had a really dismal crop. And so we're sort of using some of the same tools that were developed through REACCH and applying them in other geographies. And then, just going straight to the globe, right? We also, looking sort of at this intersection of climate change and agriculture, we know that it's something like, my numbers are going to be off here, but something like 40% of the caloric production globally comes from irrigated crops. Irrigated crops represent a smaller fraction of our land, but they're hugely important. And we also know is that with climate change, we already have seen a decrease in mountain snowpack storage efficiency, and that's going to lead to some challenges for providing irrigation for agriculture in systems that are snow melt dependent, right? This includes very much the Columbia Basin. It includes much of the Western United States, but also, a fair portion of sort of temperate agricultural systems in the globe. And we've done some work here looking at just how much of a shift we might see in the reduction in snowmelt, the idea being that we're going to have to become creative in terms of water management and water storage in a changing climate if we're going to want to continue to irrigate the way that we're doing. A local example here, and this is something that a group of us are also working on, this Idaho Climate Economic Assessment Report, which I probably have transposed a few words in there. The bottom line for Idaho is that very similar to the globe, we're expected to see a pretty substantial decrease in mountain snowpack storage efficiency. And the rough number here is that by the mid-21st century, the amount of snowpack that's no longer stored in mountains is going to be equivalent to this total reservoir capacity of the state. So that's a fairly large amount of water that is going to basically be displaced. During the REACCH project, I had a life change. We had twins. I think there was a picture somewhere of them in the wheat fields, a sign of growing up on the Palouse, I guess. And here they are this year with an incredible drought in California. This year, at least, the drought conditions for a single year actually worse than what we saw in the 2012 to 2016 period. And this is what the reservoir looked like just east of Fresno in January. It doesn't look any better today. And the story, at least some of the work that we've done recently, suggests that the broader Southwest is in a very dire situation in terms of drought. That drought is made much more acute due to climate change. And maybe we shouldn't be asking when the drought is going to end. We maybe should be asking, how do we adapt our systems? And agriculture is obviously a huge system that needs to learn to adapt to this changing environment that we're in. And then the last slide here. So Sanford and Jodi both mentioned the climate data sets, observational projections, dissemination of all these data sets. And this is something that we're continuing today. It's certainly an interesting challenge of having all this data and figuring out how to disseminate it. I'm just highlighting here some of the different types of users of the data. And a lot of the data, again, stems from sort of what was developed through REACCH, but we have obviously governmental agencies that are using this data. It's actually used directly in the the drought monitor, the drought dashboards that NOAA puts together. It's used by NGOs as well. A number of companies are starting to use it as well. I know they're using it because they're emailing me and telling me that something is broken and I'm supposed to fix it for them. So, and then it does get used quite a bit and picked up by the media. So I think this is a way of sort of highlighting the impact that REACCH has had on the scientific side, and then also on the communication side. So I will end there. Pass it back to Kenton.
Well, thank you, Sanford, Jodi, and John. Gosh, it's great to have the team together again, or some of the members, and it's wonderful to hear that REACCH didn't end when the initial grant ran out, and that it's continuing to have an impact across the West, not just here in the Northwest. And I know we have a couple of other participants or faculty who have been engaged over the past decade, and I wanted to first give them an opportunity. And so I see one hand up, and so it's Professor Adhikari, if you would like to unmute and ask a question.
Sorry, I think there was a praising sign.
Go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, just praising.
All right, good. All right. Professor Karen Humes, please go ahead and ask your question.
Sure, although of course my dog's about to bark, it always happens. I have two quick questions. One was about whether or not, or if you learned anything about water use in the water use under climate change forecasts, both in the irrigated portions of the basin, which I assume you looked at too, in addition to the dry land. And then my second question, I guess, is mostly for Jodi, and it's about whether or not you've gotten to the place yet that you can sort of compare and contrast the relative pros and cons, both in terms of emissions and sinks, between the more traditional cover crops and this interesting one that you're looking at with the forage crops with grazing.
Yeah, so I will go ahead and answer that. And Sanford, if you want to add anything, you can please join in. In REACCH project, we didn't specifically monitor or look at water balance, if you will, if that's what you're getting at, Karen. We are doing that as a part of LIT. So we're doing complete water balance analysis under each of the rotations and each phase of the rotation. And so we do have that data. And yes, to the second part, we are getting very close to being able to do, again, that systems-based analysis where we're starting to combine things like nitrogen savings due to nitrogen fixation, carbon flux, water use, and all of those different soil health attributes, all of those different aspects, and putting them together. We're not
Sanford or John, anything to add on the Karen's question about water use?
I don't have a good take on that specifically. I think that might be something that would be sussed out in the cropping models that Claudio Stockel ran. I think most of that sort of would apply to what was, I mean, most of the domain was sort of Washington State, but I don't feel like there was any massive change in water use. There's certainly a shift in the seasonal timing, perhaps.
You're muted, Sanford.
So I'm like some kind of Zoom novice or something. Water use efficiency, is a genetic property, and it is something that is of interest, and we're going to need water use efficiency to be increased, I think, for some of these systems that become water stressed. We didn't look at it, as Jodi mentioned, we didn't really measure the water budget. The forecasting models, the cropping system models incorporate water, insulation, transpiration of the crop and so forth, and making their projections for yields going forward. We were all, the whole REACH project deliberately excluded irrigated crops. You can see that footprint. That's what it is. That's our rain-fed, so-called rain-fed cereal production systems. It would be very good idea to look at that level of intensity and interdisciplinary collaboration at our large irrigated agricultural systems in Idaho and elsewhere in the West.
Thank you. Nia, you have the next question.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm from the landscape architecture department, and I'm working on representations to improve representations so that I can help the general public understand this science. And I was just wondering if you all, that first map that, I'm sorry, I don't remember who popped that up, the first speaker. That map, I was like, is that Australia? And then I finally realized that that was like, I think part of our Palouse region, possibly. I was wondering if you all could like just give a little bit more context on your representations to help people like me understand your findings better so that I can report it to other lay people like myself, because I'm trying to get people to vote differently so that we can, the public can take other actions to try to help with this problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Mia. Sanford or John or Jodi, you want to tackle that?
I think nothing galvanizes people's understanding of these issues as well as maps. And so that particular map is, it shows what we considered to be the scope of our project, but it was delineated by sort of climatic variables that result in certain kinds of agricultural practices in that footprint. It does look like Australia. It also, some people think it looks like a Daphnia. I was looking around for a picture I have of one of my cutting boards at home in my kitchen that looks like that. I can't look at it without thinking about our footprint. If people can position themselves on a map and recognize, where they are and look around and kind of relate some of the data that is conveyed, maybe that helps to understand, especially if we do projections like Jodi's two maps, which is the same region, but showing what would farmers be doing, under certain conditions, and that's graphically represented. That starts to bring home the story of change and how climate can drive that sort of change. I'm sure John's products are full of maps that not only are very useful for scientists, but very useful for the general public to understand the conditions and the situation variables that we are able to visualize. I don't know if that's helpful. I hope if you visit the REACH website, Mia, you'll see some other attempts to graphically represent what we did in ways that are useful for the general public and for farmers to learn from. After you do that, let us know. Give us some feedback.
Other questions, comments from the audience for our distinguished panelists? Karen, go ahead. I see your hand. Go ahead. Thank you.
want to make this comment unless there was time, but I appreciated all the remarks at the beginning about the positive influence of the REACCH project on science and on individuals. And I just wanted to make a note that as a participant in the Department of Geography, when we had a couple of faculty members and several students supported on the grant, what a really wonderful impact it makes on a department as well. I think we've come a long way at the University of Idaho in the last 15 years or so in terms of deans and chairs being supportive of interdisciplinary projects. I think projects like this are kind of what bring that about, because it's also positive. Also wanted to put in a plug that if you all would like some more maps made, we always have geography capstone students looking for projects like that. We're happy to connect you with one of them if that would be helpful. Thanks.
John finds out that his models are getting used because people complain, hey, it's broken and I can't make it work. And I have that. The REACCH site has some stuff that people can download, and sometimes it doesn't work. And one of them is the map, the shape file to generate that map. People have requested that I make sure that really works for them. So that's there.
Let's talk, and it'll be in January that students are looking for projects. Let's talk about that.
We have about 5 more minutes, and I'll go ahead and ask a question that I probably asked at some point, maybe the previous colloquium presentation on this project. As the climate changes in the inland Northwest, John mentioned that this might potentially be a region for growing almonds. What other alternative crops might be possible, particularly in the wetter parts of the region? Are we going to be doing more or less stone fruits or more grapes for wine? Or will I be able to drive from Colfax to Pullman and see vineyards replacing wheat fields? Or put on your forecasting and tell me about Palouse agriculture 2030 to 2040.
I haven't gone so far in my imagination to start thinking about those perennial crops like that. This once was an orchard area. When people first settled here, it was to grow apples, and of course that moved west. But so who knows? We do now have vineyards in the area. I don't know. That's partly driven by the incredibly attractive market of the wine industry, but also climate is facilitating that. This Landscapes in Transition, the name of that project is really related to your question, Kenton, because we did start to think, what's it going to look like? It will not look the same. And if you fly over it in another 20 years and look down, we know that these fall planted crops are going to start to become, they're more, they work better in the projected climate scenarios. So we should see more of them. That will change what things look like when you take that drive that you mentioned, Kenton. So don't know about trees, don't know about vines, but the winter pea that Jodi mentioned is going to be much more prominent here. Since this is a little late, but since Dan is on, or I think he's on, I promised I'd show this. So does it come into focus? Oh no, I have to change my background. It throws it out of focus.
Yes, you got to take off the fuzzy background. There we go. The numbers. Numbers.
So this is a composition by Dan, and it was based on. In case you can read music, you can sing it out to yourself, but it's based on some data we had about how our whole project integrated. That was a social network analysis, and he took the data and generated this score, which is meant for performance by a flute choir, and it's been performed at some of our events for the project, and also apparently at venues around the country. So talk about our legacy again. A little music. Thank you, Dan.
So Sanford and Jodi and John, what happens to the archive of REACH? Is there a repository at special collections, or are you each keeping your own pieces of it, or will somebody be able to go back 10 years from now and see some of the things that you've shown in terms of the artifacts like that musical score, or recordings or photos or maps?
Well, we're hoping that's what for one thing, John has something to add to, but the website is, I mentioned, is a repository. Also, the formerly known as NKN, Northwest Knowledge Network, houses lots of our data sets, their model outputs, the NetCDF files of the grid models are there. You can download them. All of the data from the project, not all, but most is there. So, and then some of the photos you mentioned, those kinds of things, they're on the website too. Could we add to it? There's probably some more we could add, but there were 4 annual projects that were like magazine style reports. They're all there as PDFs. So this is the place to go.
John or Jodi, anything to add by way of a closing comment before we wrap up?
I guess I can start or end where I started, with just saying that, this is an incredible foundation that we've built with the people involved in the 3 different states and USDA. And I suspect that we will continue to be successful in bringing resources to try to work on this climate issue, which is, to me, it seems like it's coming faster than we anticipated, and we're experiencing more problems sooner than we thought we were, at least in my opinion. So I'm happy to have that and be part of this history and a team ready to move forward as well.
Yeah, I'll echo that. This is not a problem that's a flash in the pan. It is here. And the topics central to REACH are critical for food security, for our own economic livelihoods. And so I'm really glad to have been a part of it, and glad to see this legacy continue.
Thanks to all 3 of you for what you've done and what you're continuing to do. Thanks for our audience for joining today. If you joined late or have a colleague that was unable to attend today, the YouTube recording will be available sometime later today, and then it'll also be on the main Renfrew archive page on I think it's uidaho/class/MRIC, so you can view it or share it with friends. Next week, we'll be hearing from Casey Bertram from Terra Graphics International Foundation on another climate related talk dealing with clean energy and green energy. So I hope you can join us then. And before we let our panelists go, I hope you'll join in a virtual round of applause if your camera is on, or just put up the crossed hands in Zoom. So thank you all for being part of the conversation today. And we look forward to seeing all of you at future programs. And John, you're invited anytime on a Tuesday to drop in at 12:30 and catch up with your former colleagues from U of I. Bye for now. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy this lovely September weather, and see you next week.
Thank you.